Good afternoon, everybody. It's really good to be here. This is a picture of our family a year and 10 months ago. There's 5 more family members added on since then. These are me and my wife. My wife Clara's here. And we've been married 33 years. This is our whole immediate family. But we added another daughter-in-law and 4 more grandchildren in the last 22 months. So God's been blessing us mightily. And if I could, let me just mention that family is massively important, for a nation. Strong families are massively important for a nation. If you ever get a chance to read a book, here's the book you want to read on family and marriage. It's called Family and Civilization by Carl Zimmerman. Family and Civilization by Carl Zimmerman. It was actually written in 1947. Carl Zimmerman was a sociologist. If you know anything about sociology, and sociologists, they don't like Christianity. They either ignore it or they act like it did nothing but bad to Western civilization for 2,000 years. But Carl Zimmerman, who wasn't a Christian but was a renowned sociologist, was an honest man. And he shows within his book much of the good that Christianity brought to Western civilization over 2,000 years. And in 1947, get this, he predicted that America would soon see divorce for any reason or no reason at all. And we now have no-fault divorce since the late 1960s. He predicted in 1947 that we would see legalized abortion, which came about in 1973. And in 1947, he predicted that we would see rampant homosexuality within our culture, which, hello, we're there. So, the thing that's interesting about his studies, he looked at the Greek and Roman civilizations, and he looked at the French and Bolshevik revolutions, and he found the demarcation point in his studies which detailed at which point civilizations began their decline. And what he found from his studies was that the beginning of the decline of each civilization is when people no longer want to have children. And what he meant by that wasn't that they wanted 0, although many do. What he meant by that was they only want 1 or 2. And he said the reason that that is the beginning point of the decline of any civilization, he said was, first he pointed out that the Greeks, it took 150 years for them, from the time they didn't want to have children till they fell to the Romans. It took the Romans 400 years from the time they didn't want to have children till they fell to the Germanic hordes. And he said the reason that not having children was the beginning of the decline was when men want to be husbands and fathers, when women want to be wives and mothers, it produces within people virtue. But when men don't want to be husbands and fathers, and women don't want to be wives and mothers, it produces within people vice. So that was what he had to say. So the family is very important to the health of the civil government, to the health of the nation. The statists understand that in order to strengthen the state, you have to weaken the family. And so they bring in law and other things to influence the culture in order to weaken the family so they can strengthen the arm of the state. So family is extremely important. But what I want to talk to you about this morning is this afternoon, sorry about that, I always preach in the morning, is this matter of our federal government, which has become a tyrant, which is clearly outside its constitutional restraints. And the first thing I want you to know is that there is no federal solution to the problem in our nation. The federal government is the problem. I remember a few years back, I went to Washington, D.C., and I was stunned at how they've made the place, since I was a child, or a teenager, I should say, they've made the place into a veritable fortress. And it reminded me, as I was standing there, of what Plato said to the tyrant Dionysius when he met him on the streets of Sicily, surrounded by his many bodyguards. Plato said to him, "What harm have you done that you should need so many guards?" And that's what our federal government has done. They have harmed the people of our nation. You just look at their laws, you look at their policies, you look at their court opinions, you look at their bureaucracies, they have harmed the American people. You look at the fact that they have committed open warfare against the helpless preborn, making them open game to those who kill for profit. You look at the imposition of homosexual marriage upon the states now by the federal judiciary. You look at Obamacare. You look at the plethora of laws they've created to invade our domestic affairs, and you can see that they have clearly become a tyrant. Everyone senses it. It's known within the culture now that we have a government that is out of control, a federal government that has become a tyrant. We can also see this in the fact of the cycle that's been going on for decades now. The states make a law to try to stop some of the federal tyranny. And 9 times out of 10, what happens to that? The federal courts rule against the states, and they rule the laws that the states have made to be unconstitutional. That's what they do. And what happens to the people who come out and make an effort to fight against federal tyranny? They get involved in these good laws that are put forth. They put a lot of time, maybe a lot of money, into the effort to get this law passed, only to have a federal court annihilate it. What does that do to people? They eventually go home. This is even seen in the election cycle, the tyranny of the federal government. When it comes to the federal level, it doesn't matter, especially, whether you're Democrat or Republican. It's a federal tyranny, and that's a fact. Consider this for a moment. Consider that every 4 years, the Republicans tell their people, you need to vote so that we can put into positions of the Supreme Court justice our justices, rather than a Democrat being elected and they putting in their justices. We have to get our president in so we can get our justices in so we can overturn Roe v. Wade. I'm 50-some years old, and I've watched that game be played for decades. So every 4 years, they stampede good people to run and go vote for their candidate. And you know what? Let's look at the facts here. First off, 7 of the 9 Supreme Court justices, when Roe v. Wade was ruled upon, were Republican-appointed Supreme Court justices. And during the next 40 years after, from 1973 on, 40 years after, the Republicans always held the majority of Supreme Court justices either 7-2 or 8-1 during that entire time. Do you see how you're getting played? It's a federal tyrant that we're dealing with here. He's out of control. He's long been out of his constitutional restraints. And what I want to talk to you this afternoon about is the doctrine of the lesser magistrate, because it's a tool which shows from Scripture and history how you can rein in the tyranny of a higher authority, and you can often do it bloodlessly. Understand? Bloodlessly. So let me begin by giving you the definition of the doctrine, and then we'll go from there. The doctrine of the lesser magistrate is simply that when the higher or superior civil authority makes an unjust or immoral law, policy, or court opinion, the lower or lesser ranking civil authority has both the right and the duty not to obey the higher authority, and if necessary, to actively resist the higher authority. That's the doctrine in a nutshell. So what we're talking about when we're talking about lesser magistrates, we're not talking about me and you are lesser magistrates. We're talking about elected or appointed state officials, whether at the state level, the county level, or the municipal level. Okay? That's who we're referring to when we're talking about lower magistrates. Here is a quote from Emperor Trajan. He was actually a higher magistrate, but he kind of succinct the doctrine when he said this while giving a sword to a subordinate. He said, "Use this sword against my enemies if I give righteous commands, but if I give unrighteous commands, use it against me." And that's the doctrine in a nutshell. When the higher authority makes unjust or immoral laws, policies, court rulings, the lower authority should resist and oppose the higher authority in what they're doing. So this is a picture of Emperor Caligula. If you know anything about Emperor Caligula, he's like tyranny personified. But our federal government seems to be bent on, running right up there with him at this point. In fact, when you look at the history of Rome and how it fell, it's almost like our federal masters sat down and looked at how Rome fell, and they're implementing all the same policies and laws and immoralities upon the nation to make sure that America falls also. Well, let me tell you a story about a guy named Governor Publius Petronius. Governor Publius Petronius was under Emperor Caligula, and the year was 39 AD.